If you ever find yourself on a hill overlooking the town of Paarl in South Africa, you'll see something that looks like it's straight out of a sci-fi movie. It's this incredible, soaring collection of columns and domes, all made of concrete and granite. This is the Afrikaans Language Monument. And trust me, it's way more than just a building. It's a story that's been set in stone, and we're about to unpack. And that's really the big question, isn't it? How can a bunch of inanimate objects possibly capture the living, breathing, and, let's be honest, often controversial history of a language like Afrikaans? Well, as you're about to see, every single curve and every pillar of this monument has something to say. Okay, so let's start with the design. The architect, a guy named Jan van Wyk, had this amazing vision. He didn't want to build just another statue or a boring old plaque. No, he saw a sculpture that could literally show you the diverse roots and the explosive growth of the Afrikaans language. He was basically trying to build an idea. And here's how he did it. He gave each part a specific job. You've got the massive main spire. That's all about the language's growth. Then there are these columns, which represent its European roots. The round domes, those symbolize its African influences. And there's even a bridge, which we'll get to, that represents a key contribution from Asia. Let's kick things off with that giant spire. So that main spire is a real statement piece. It shoots 57 meters right into the sky, and it was actually inspired by the writer C.J. Langenhoven, who described Afrikaans as a rapidly ascending arc. But here's the cool part. If you look at the very top, it's open. That was totally on purpose. It's meant to show that the language isn't some finished museum piece. It's still growing, still changing right now. Now, this is where the monument starts telling a really fascinating story of give and take. On one side, you have 3 columns for European languages. Think Dutch, German, and French. And you'll notice they actually get smaller, symbolizing how their influence waned over time. But then, on the other side, you've got 3 domes representing African languages. And what do? They get bigger, showing their growing and absolutely vital influence on how Afrikaans developed. So you've got Europe on one side and Africa on the other. What connects them? Well, it's a wall that's designed to look like a bridge. This part represents the huge contribution of Malay languages from Southeast Asia. The architect actually got this idea from a poet, N.P. Van Wyk Loo, who once beautifully described Afrikaans as a bridge that connects the shining West and magical Africa. As you're walking up to the monument itself, you'll see this phrase carved right into the pathway. Dit is ons erns. It translates to, we are earnest about this. And it's such a powerful statement of just how dedicated those early founders were. You know, this wasn't just some hobby for them. It was a serious, heartfelt declaration. So that's the what. But what about the why? Why build such a massive, symbolic structure in the first place? Well, to understand that, we've got to rewind the clock a bit. This monument was built to celebrate some very specific turning points in the history of Afrikaans. The story really kicks off back in 1875. A small group gets together and decides they're going to make Afrikaans a formal written language, totally separate from Dutch. It was a long haul, but 50 years later, in 1925, they did it. It became an official language. And then, fast forward another 50 years to 1975, on the 100th anniversary of that very first meeting, this monument was officially opened to celebrate that entire journey. But the story doesn't just live up on that mountain. If you go down into the town of Paarl, you can find the actual house where that first society met. It was the home of its founder, Gideon Mulherb, and today it's the Afrikaans Language Museum, where the history of the language is carefully preserved. And inside, it's like a time capsule. You can see the original printing press that churned out the very first Afrikaans newspaper. But for me, the most fascinating thing is the museum's work on what they call Arabic Afrikaans. See, long before the language was formalized with the alphabet we use today, the Cape Muslim community was already writing Afrikaans using Arabic script, mainly for religious texts. It's a part of the language's history that really complicates the simple narrative. And that brings us to the most complex part of this whole story. Because of when it was built and why it was built, the monument has a deeply, deeply contested legacy. For some, it's a symbol of cultural pride. For many others, it's a painful reminder of oppression. You have to understand the timing here is just everything. The monument opens in October 1975. It's a huge celebration of Afrikaner culture, right in the middle of apartheid. Just 8 months later, in June 1976, the Soweto uprising explodes, sparked by students protesting being forced to learn in Afrikaans at their schools. They saw it as the language of the oppressor. The contrast between those two events is absolutely staggering. And you could feel that tension right at the opening ceremony. The famous colored writer Adam Small, who was a giant in Afrikaans literature, refused to even show up in protest. But then, in this really telling twist, his poem, a version of the anthem Nkosi Sikelele iAfrika, was still read out loud at the event. It just shows how complicated things were from day one.
So, in a post-apartheid South Africa, what do you do with a symbol like this? Well, the people who run the monument today have been trying to redefine its role to see if it can actually become a bridge, not just in its concrete design, but in reality. And here's a fact that changes the entire conversation. Today, more than half, over 50%, of all Afrikaans speakers are not white. That demographic reality completely flips the old, outdated perception of Afrikaans as some kind of exclusively white language on its head. So, facing this new reality, the monument's management is trying to reposition it as a symbol for all speakers of the language. They're actively celebrating its diverse, creolized origins. They're promoting different varieties like Kaps and the historic Arabic Afrikaans. They're even in the middle of a debate about whether the monument itself needs a new name to be more inclusive.
Which leaves us with a really big, thought-provoking question. Can a structure that's so deeply rooted in a divisive past truly be reclaimed? Can this story in concrete evolve to tell a new story, one that honors all the voices that shape the language and maybe even helps build a more united future? The monument is still standing, but its story? Well, that's clearly still being written.